May I eat what you didn't finish, Mr. Caleb Redhawk stopped with his coffee halfway to his mouth. Beside his table stood a little girl no more than 5 years old, holding an empty tin cup in both hands. Her blue dress was facey, one sleeve carefully mended, and dust covered the toes of her worn shoes. But she was not looking at him. She was looking at his plate, where half a biscuit and several pieces of beef remained. The girl swallowed, then added quickly, "Only if you're done with it." Caleb had faced men with guns who made him less uncomfortable than those hopeful little eyes. He pushed the plate toward her. "Sit." She climbed onto the chair, broke the biscuit carefully in half, ate one piece and slipped the other into her pocket. Caleb noticed. "Saving that?" The girl nodded. "For Mama." He looked away for a moment. "What's your name?" "Lily Whitmore." His fingers stopped against the coffee cup. "Whitmore." Caleb looked at her again, more carefully this time. Brown hair, a stubborn little chin, and something in her eyes that touched a memory he had no intention of opening. "Where's your father?" Lily considered the question. "I don't have one." Caleb frowned. "He dead." She shrugged. "Mama only says he isn't with us." "Lily Seathley." The voice came from across the street. Caleb turned, and for one heartbeat, the world seemed to forget how to move. Laura Whitmore stood on the other side of the dusty road. 5 years had changed her. She was thinner, dressed more plainly, and there was a tiredness around her eyes that had not been there before. But none of that mattered. Caleb knew her before his mind had time to tell his heart that he should not. Laura saw him. She stopped. There had been a time when she would run toward him the moment she saw him. Caleb remembered that against his will. Now she crossed the road slowly. "Mama," Lily said happily, "this gentleman gave me his supper." Then she looked back at him, suddenly realizing something. "I forgot to ask your name." "Mr." Caleb's eyes stayed on Laura. "Caleb." Lily smiled. "I'm Lily." "I know." But Laura said nothing. She did not need to ask his name. There had been a time when it had been the easiest name in the world for her to say. Caleb barely heard her. "Mama." His eyes moved from Laura to the little girl beside him. 5 years. Jonah Miller, a child about 5 years old. He hated how quickly his mind put the pieces together. "You?" he asked. Laura rested one hand on Lily's shoulder. "Yes." Caleb looked at the child again when he spoke. His voice was quieter. "Millers." Something changed in Laura's eyes. Hurt came first, so quickly he might have imagined it. Then the old pride he remembered so well covered it. Does it matter? It did. God, it did. No. Laura held his gaze for another second. Neither of them called him a liar. Lily looked between them with open curiosity. "You know my mama?" Caleb's eyes remained on Laura. "I used to." Laura flinched so slightly that anyone else would have missed it. Caleb did not. "We should go." "Lily." The girl gathered the food and smiled at him. "Thank you, Mr. Caleb." Caleb watched them walk away. After a few steps, Lily looked back and waved. Laura did not. He told himself that was better. Then Lily looked up at her mother and said, "I like Mr. Caleb." Laura's steps faltered for only a moment. "Do you know him very well?" "Mama." Laura kept walking. Once, she had thought she knew Caleb Redhawk better than anyone in the world. Once, she had believed he knew her the same way. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." Lily accepted the answer and reached into her pocket for the half biscuit she had saved. She had no idea the man behind them was her father, and Caleb had no idea that 5 years earlier, Laura had tried to tell him exactly that. He had simply never let her finish. 5 years had passed. But some wounds had never closed, and some love had never truly died. Caleb believed Laura had betrayed him. Laura had spent 5 years living with the words he never allowed her to say. And now, without either of them being ready, their little girl had brought them face to face again. But what really happened the night they lost each other? And what will Caleb do when he discovers that the child he believes belongs to another man is actually his own daughter? Stay with me, because their story is only beginning. And if you love emotional Wild West stories about love, loss, and second chances, subscribe to the Wild West Tales and join us for the journey ahead. There had been a time when Laura Whitmore could make Caleb Redhawk smile simply by refusing to leave him alone. She was 17 when she first decided he needed her company. Caleb was 21 and disagreed completely. The first time she brought him lunch while he repaired a fence outside town, he looked at the basket, then at her. "I have food, I know." "Then why did you bring more?" "Because yours looks terrible." Caleb glanced at the dried meat beside him. "You came all this way to insult my lunch." "No, that was just a pleasant surprise." She sat down before he could tell her to leave. That became Laura's habit. She found reasons to appear wherever Caleb happened to be. She needed help with a saddle she knew perfectly well how to fasten. She wanted to learn which tracks belonged to coyotes, although Caleb suspected she already knew. Once, she rode nearly 3 miles to ask whether the clouds looked like rain. "They don't," Caleb said. Laura looked up at the perfectly blue sky. "Good. I was worried. You're a terrible liar. And yet you keep answering me." Caleb had no reply to that. For months, he pretended she was a nuisance. Then one afternoon, she did not come. Caleb repaired the same section of fence twice before realizing he had been looking toward the road every few minutes. She did not come the next day either. On the 3rd morning, he rode into town and found her outside her father's house with a bandage around one hand. "What happened?" Laura blinked at him. "Good morning to you too. What happened to your hand?" "I cut it." Caleb took her wrist and inspected the bandage. "Badly." A smile slowly appeared on her face. He released her immediately. Don't what?" "Look so pleased with yourself. You missed me. I noticed you were gone." "That isn't the same thing." "No." Laura smiled wider. "Of course not." After that, Caleb stopped pretending quite so hard. By the following spring, there was a cottonwood beside the creek where they went when they wanted to be alone. One evening, Caleb gave Laura a small turquoise pendant that had belonged to his mother. Laura became unusually quick when he fastened it around her neck. "Your mother's." He nodded. "Then I'll keep it forever." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You planning on staying that long?" Laura touched the turquoise stone. "Are you asking me to?" "I might be." "That is a terrible proposal. I haven't proposed yet." "Good. You have time to improve." He laughed then. The quiet laugh Laura had once worked months to earn. And she leaned against his shoulder beneath the cottonwood. They spoke about a small house, horses, a garden. Laura insisted she could grow despite having killed nearly everything she had ever planted. Caleb said he would ask Thomas for her hand after the next cattle drive. Neither of them knew how little time they had left. 2 weeks later, Laura stood alone in her bedroom, staring at the calendar. One trembling hand pressed against her stomach. She counted again. Then once more. A frightened, beautiful smile appeared on her face. Caleb was going to be a father. She had barely begun imagining how she would tell him when she heard her father Call from downstairs. Laura. Something in Thomas Whitmore's voice erased her smile. She found him, sitting at the kitchen table, an old bundle of papers before him. He looked older than he had that morning. Sit down, Papa. What is it? Thomas could not meet her eyes. Before you marry Caleb, there is something you need to know. Thomas Whitmore kept both hands on the papers, as if letting go of them might make the past impossible to contain. It happened 14 years ago, he said, before you were old enough to understand any of it. Laura sat across from him, one hand still unconsciously resting near her stomach. What happened? Thomas looked toward the window. The Red Hawks had land north of Dry Creek. Not much, but that there was water on it. Good water. During the drought. That made it worth more than anyone wanted to admit. A cattle company had been buying land throughout the valley. The Red Hawks refused to sell. Soon afterward, documents appeared claiming part of their property had never legally belonged to them. Thomas had been a young clerk working for the land office. They brought me a survey and asked me to certify it. Laura stared at him. Was it accurate? Thomas said nothing. Papa. No. The words seemed to change the air in the room. Thomas swallowed. I knew the boundary had been altered. I knew what they were doing. But I had debts. Your mother was sick. They offered money. And they told me nobody would be hurt. The Red Hawks would be forced off the land. That was all. Laura felt cold. What happened? Men went out there to remove them. Thomas finally looked at her. Caleb's father refused to leave. There had been an argument, then gunfire. In the confusion, a lantern was knocked over inside the house by the time anyone could control the flames. Caleb's father had been shot, and his mother was trapped inside. Caleb had been 7 years old. Laura stood so suddenly, her chair scraped against the floor. No, I never ordered anyone to hurt them. But you signed it. Thomas lowered his head. Yes. Laura backed away from the table. The turquoise pendant Caleb had given her suddenly felt heavy against her chest. All she could see was the man beneath the cottonwood, asking if she planned on staying forever. The man who had placed the last thing he had from his mother around her neck. And she was carrying his child. Does Caleb know? Not about me. Laura closed her eyes. Then I have to tell him. Thomas looked up sharply. Laura. Wait, I'm going to marry him. I know. I'm carrying his child. Thomas went completely still. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas covered his face with one hand. Oh, Laura. She had imagined telling her father differently. She had imagined embarrassment. Perhaps anger. Eventually happiness. Not this. I have to tell Caleb everything. And you should. Thomas's voice broke. But give me a little time. There are other men named in those papers. Men who still have power here. I need to find the original survey. If Caleb sees only my signature, he'll believe I planned all of it. Laura looked at the papers. How much time? A few days. She should have said no. Instead, she thought of her father. She thought of Caleb. Then her hand drifted unconsciously toward the child. Caleb still did not know existed. 3 days. Thomas nodded. Laura left the room, carrying 2 truths that could change Caleb's life. One terrible and one beautiful. And she had no idea which one to tell him first. She never got the chance. 2 days later, Caleb rode into looking for an old property record concerning the northern boundary of his ranch. The clerk brought him the wrong file. Caleb almost handed it back. Then he saw the words, Red Hawk. He opened it. Unaltered survey. A removal order. 14 years of questions suddenly beginning to answer themselves. And at the bottom of the certification, beneath ink faded with age, was a name he knew better than he wished he did. Thomas Whitmore. That evening, Laura heard a horse stop hard outside the house. The front door opened. Caleb walked in, without removing his hat. There was no anger on his face. That frightened her more. He placed the old document on the table between them and looked directly into her eyes. Did you know? Laura looked at the document between them, then at Caleb. Yes. One word was enough to change his face. You knew. Caleb. Listen to me. How long? Laura hesitated. She thought of the promise she had made Thomas. 3 days. Just enough time to find the original survey and prove that his signature was only one piece of something much larger. That hesitation lasted no more than a heartbeat. For Caleb, it was an answer. How long? Laura. My father told me because he wanted to make it right. There were other men involved, men who wanted your family's land. But you knew. I was going to tell you. When? After we married. No. After I called Thomas Whitmore my father. Caleb. No. His hand came down against the table. My father was shot because of that paper. My mother burned to death in our home. And you stood beneath that cottonwood, wearing her necklace, while knowing your father's name was on it. Laura went white. That isn't what happened. Then tell me what did. She opened her mouth. But how could she explain Thomas without betraying the little time he had begged for? How could she tell Caleb about the child growing inside her while he was looking at her, as though every memory between them had become a lie? Her silence destroyed what words might still have saved. Caleb gave a small, broken laugh. I trusted you. The anger in Laura disappeared. I never lied about loving you. For the first time, pain broke completely through his anger. That makes it worse. Laura stared at him. Caleb looked at the turquoise pendant around her neck, the last thing he had from his mother, resting against the heart of the woman he now believed had betrayed him. He could not bear it. Laura stepped toward him. There's something else you need to know. Enough. Her hand instinctively moved toward her stomach. He never saw it. Please. Caleb. I said enough. If you walk out now, I don't want another word from you. Laura stopped. The man who once noticed when she disappeared for 2 days could no longer bear to hear her speak. Something inside her broke quietly. Caleb reached the door. She made one last attempt. Caleb. He stopped. For 1 second, Laura believed he might turn around. He did not. Whatever life you choose after tonight, don't bring it back to my door. Laura lowered the hand resting over their unborn child. Is that really what you want? Caleb closed his eyes. No. But grief was louder than love, and pride was stronger than reason. When he answered, his voice was almost a whisper. I never want to see you again. Then he walked out. And Laura, who had been only seconds away from telling him he was going to be a father, let him go. Caleb had been gone less than an hour when someone fired through the Whitmore kitchen window. The bullet buried itself in the wall above Thomas's chair. Laura screamed, but Thomas did not look surprised. They know. He whispered, Who? The men behind the Red Hawk papers. Thomas had spent years hiding what he knew about the false survey. Now, he had begun searching for the original records, hoping to prove who had ordered the Red Hawks, driven from their land. Someone had discovered what he was doing. The bullet had not been meant to kill him. Not yet. It was a warning. If I stay, Thomas said, staring at the hole in the wall, the next one won't miss. By midnight, Jonah Miller was standing in their barn with a wagon ready. As the young doctor who had treated Thomas before, he was one of the few men Thomas trusted enough to ask for help. "You can't stay here," Jonah said. "Not if they know you're looking for those records." Laura stood beside the wagon with one small bag in her hand. Everything was happening too quickly. Her father was in danger. She was carrying Caleb's child, and the last words Caleb had spoken to her still echoed in her head. "I never want to see you again." For one brief moment, Laura looked toward the dark road. Some part of her still hoped to see him coming. The road remained empty. She climbed into the wagon beside her father. Jonah drove them out before sunrise. Caleb lasted 2 days. 2 days of anger. 2 nights without sleep. 2 days of remembering Laura's face when he walked away. On the third morning, he finally admitted what his pride had been fighting since the moment he left. He needed to hear the rest. Caleb rode to the Whitmore house. The door was unlocked. The kitchen was empty. A broken window had been covered with a board. Chairs stood crooked around the table, and Laura's blue shawl was gone from its hook. Laura, nothing. He found a neighbor outside. "They left 2 mornings ago." "Where?" "Don't know." "Who took them?" The man hesitated. "Dr. Miller." Caleb said nothing. He had heard Jonah's name around Laura before. He knew the young doctor admired her. Until that moment, Caleb had never considered him important enough to fear. Now Laura was gone. With him, Caleb looked at the empty house and felt something inside him turn cold. He never followed. 5 years passed. Caleb built the Red Hawk Ranch until men who once dismissed the half-Apache boy came asking him for work. He bought cattle, added land, survived bad winters and worse summers. Rebecca Stone remained nearby through much of it. She was intelligent, beautiful, patient, and everyone in the valley eventually stopped asking whether Caleb would marry her. Rebecca stopped asking too. Caleb gave her nothing to wait for. Hundreds of miles away, Laura gave birth to a daughter with Jonah in the next room and Thomas holding her hand. She named the child Lily. When Thomas later died, Laura was left with very little. She sewed dresses, washed linens, and worked in boarding house kitchens. Jonah helped when Lily was sick, and when Laura truly had nowhere else to turn. But every kindness became a debt she insisted on repaying. Once he brought groceries after learning she had missed 2 days of work. "Laura, it's food. Then let me earn it. You don't have to turn everything into a debt." "I know." She took in his coat the next morning and repaired a tear in the lining before returning it. Jonah understood. He could help Laura stand. She would never allow him to carry her. And so 5 years passed in 2 different lives. Caleb never married Rebecca. Laura never married Jonah. Neither knew that the other had remained alone for exactly the same reason. Then a hungry little girl walked up to Caleb Redhawk and asked for what remained on his plate. Now, sitting outside the restaurant, after Laura had taken Lily away, Caleb stared at the half-empty chair across from him. 5 years old. Laura had left with Jonah 5 years ago. He did not know that Laura had been carrying his child when she climbed into Jonah Miller's wagon. So Caleb reached for the only explanation that made sense. Jonah's daughter. Caleb decided the easiest thing would be to stay away from Lily Whitmore. It lasted until the next morning. He was tying his horse outside the general store when he heard a small voice behind him. "Mr. Caleb." He closed his eyes for half a second before turning. Lily stood beside the boardwalk, smiling as though they had arranged to meet. "You came back. I live here." I knew maybe meant yes. Caleb remembered telling her he might be there tomorrow. Apparently the child remembered everything. Then he noticed she was walking strangely. "What happened to your shoe?" Lily looked down. The sole had separated at the toe and was flapping against the dirt. "It's fine." "It isn't." Mama says we can fix it tonight. Caleb crouched before he could reconsider. He examined the shoe, then pulled a small piece of rawhide from his saddlebag. Lily watched with fascination as he worked. You know how to fix everything. No. What can't you fix? Caleb's hands paused. Plenty. She seemed disappointed by the answer. A few minutes later, the sole was secure. How much do I owe you? Caleb looked up. You're 5. I still asked. That caught him off guard. You owe me nothing. Lily considered this, then reached into her pocket and produced a small peppermint. You can have this. I don't want your candy. It's payment. Caleb stared at her. Lily stared back. He took the peppermint. Pleasure doing business with you. She grinned, and before Caleb could stop himself, he laughed. It was only a quiet sound. Almost nothing. But across the street, Laura heard it. She had come out of the boarding house carrying folded linens and stopped when she saw them together. Caleb was still crouched beside Lily, the peppermint in his hand, while her daughter demonstrated the repaired shoe as if he had performed surgery. For one brief moment, Laura saw the man beneath the cottonwood again, the man who used to pretend she annoyed him while waiting for her to return. Caleb looked up. Their eyes met. His smile disappeared. He stood immediately. Laura felt foolish for how much that hurt. Lily. I didn't bother him. Mama, my shoe broke. I can see that. Laura noticed the rawhide repair. I'll pay you. No. Caleb. It took 5 minutes. I didn't ask you to do it. Something hardened in his face. There it is. Laura frowned. What? Nothing. He turned toward his horse. Lily looked between them. Why do you two always sound angry? Neither answered. That evening, Caleb ate at the same restaurant. He ordered too much food. He told himself it was an accident. When Lily appeared at the edge of the porch, he simply pushed the extra biscuit toward the empty chair. She climbed up, without asking this time. For a while they ate quietly. Then Lily asked, Do you have children? No. Do you want any? Caleb looked toward the street. Never thought much about it. Lily swung her feet beneath the chair. Then she asked, with the casual seriousness of a child who had no idea where to place a knife, if you had a little girl, would you leave her? Caleb slowly turned back to her. For the first time since they had met, he had no answer. Caleb found his answer to Lily's question 3 days later, though not in the way he expected. A stagecoach stopped outside the boarding house just before noon. Lily was sitting on the steps when a tall man in a dark coat climbed down. Uncle Jonah. She ran so quickly that he barely had time to put down his medical bag before she threw herself at him. Jonah Miller laughed and lifted her into his arms. Caleb watched from across the street. He told himself there was no reason to keep watching. Then Laura came outside. The change in her face was immediate. Relief, warmth, familiarity. Jonah put Lily down and embraced Laura. It was brief. Caleb still hated it. 5 years earlier, Jonah Miller had driven Laura away from this town. Now he stood with her daughter clinging to one hand, while Laura smiled at him, as though his arrival meant home. Caleb turned away. Careful. Rebecca Stone had stopped beside him. You're staring. I'm not. Rebecca followed his gaze and understood immediately. She had always understood too much. You could at least pretend to be pleased to see me. Caleb looked at her. I am. That expression must terrify your cattle, despite himself. His mouth almost curved. Rebecca slipped her hand through his arm. Across the street, Laura saw it. Her smile disappeared. She hated herself for that. Rebecca had done nothing wrong. She had been there after Laura left. She belonged in Caleb's world now, in ways Laura no longer did. That should not have hurt. It did. Later that afternoon, Laura found Caleb alone behind the general store loading supplies into his wagon. You didn't need to repair Lily's shoe. Caleb kept working. We already discussed this. I'm paying you. She placed several coins on the wagon. He looked at them. Keep it. I don't owe you anything. No. Miller seems to have taken care of that. Laura's eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? Caleb lifted a sack into the wagon. Nothing. You've become very fond of that word. He finally faced her. Miller seems to have taken good care of what's his. The moment he said it, he knew he had gone too far. Laura became very still. Lily is not a possession. I was talking about me. Caleb said nothing. Laura gave a small, bitter laugh. You lost the right to ask about my life 5 years ago. I didn't ask. No. You never do. You decide what happened, and then punish everyone according to the answer you gave yourself. That landed closer to the truth than either of them understood. Caleb's jaw tightened. At least Miller was there when you needed him. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Something ugly twisted inside Caleb. Laura saw it, and suddenly she understood. You're jealous. His eyes hardened. Of Miller. You tell me. Caleb stepped closer. And Rebecca. It was Laura's turn to go silent. For one suspended second, 5 years fell away again. They stood too close, angry about people neither of them loved, while refusing to admit why. Then Laura stepped back. Jonah helped my father when we had no one else. Caleb's voice turned cold. He seems very good at staying close to what he wants. Laura looked straight into his eyes. At least he knows how to stay. Caleb had an answer for almost everything. Not for that. The horse broke loose just after noon. A delivery wagon had stopped outside the general store when a stack of empty crates crashed onto the street. The mare between the shafts panicked. She reared, tore one rein free, and lurched sideways toward the boardwalk. People shouted and scattered. Lily did not. She stood in the road holding the peppermint she had just bought, frozen as the wagon swung toward her. Caleb saw her. He did not think. He dropped the feed sack in his hands and ran. Lily. She turned at the sound of her name. Caleb reached her a heartbeat before the mare did. He caught Lily around the waist and threw himself toward the water trough. The wagon wheel passed close enough to tear the heel from his boot before two men finally caught the reins. For several seconds, Caleb remained on one knee with Lily locked against his chest. You hurt. She shook her head. Anywhere? No. Are you sure? Her lower lip trembled. Caleb checked her arms anyway. Then her face, as though an injury might appear if he stopped looking. Only when Lily suddenly wrapped both arms around his neck did he become still. I was scared. Caleb closed his eyes. So was I. Across the street, Laura had gone white. She reached them and pulled Lily into her arms. Are you hurt? No. Mama, Mr. Caleb got me. Laura looked at him. There were 100 things between them that neither knew how to say. For once, she chose the simplest. Thank you. Caleb nodded. Then he walked away before she could see that his hands were shaking. That evening, he sat outside the bunkhouse with a piece of pine and a knife. He told himself he was only keeping his hands busy. An hour later, the wood had 4 legs by the time Rebecca found him. It had a head, a mane, and 2 pointed ears. She leaned against the post. I didn't know you made toys. I don't. Rebecca looked at the little wooden horse in his hand. Of course. Caleb ignored her and chafed another thin curl from the neck. Rebecca had seen what happened in town. She had seen Caleb run toward a frightened horse without looking at the wagon, the wheel, or anything except Lily. More importantly, she had seen his face afterward. You could have been killed. She was standing in the road. So were 3 other people. She's 5. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Jonah Miller's daughter. The knife stopped. Caleb looked up. Rebecca saw something cross his face before he buried it. Yes. And you're carving her a horse. The girl had a bad day. A sad smile touched Rebecca's mouth. For 5 years she had waited for Caleb to care about something enough to become vulnerable again. Now, she almost wished she had not seen it. You really don't know, do you? Caleb frowned. Know what? Rebecca looked at the little wooden horse in his hands. You're already falling in love with that child. Caleb gave Lily the wooden horse the next morning. She stared at it, as if he had handed her something made of gold. It's mine. That's usually how gifts work. Lily hugged the little horse to her chest. What's his name? I made him. Naming him is your problem. She considered this, seriously. Peppermint. Caleb looked at her. Because that's how we became friends. He almost told her they were not friends. Then Lily smiled, and he decided it was not worth the argument. As she lifted the horse, something slipped from beneath the collar of her dress. A small turquoise stone caught the sunlight. Caleb stopped breathing. He knew the shape. The thin silver setting. The tiny dark mark along one edge, where it had once struck the floor when he was a boy. His mother's pendant. The one he had fastened around Laura's neck beneath the cottonwood. Where did you get that? His voice changed enough that Lily looked down. This. Caleb crouched in front of her. Who gave it to you? Mama. Why? Lily touched the stone carefully. She said it belonged to my father. The street seemed to go silent around him. Caleb stared at the pendant. For 5 years he had believed Laura had taken it with her, because it meant nothing. Now she had given it to her daughter, and told the child it belonged to her father. Did she say his name? Lily shook her head. Why not? Mama gets sad when I ask. Caleb stood too quickly. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps Laura had simply told Lily the pendant belonged to her father, because explaining where it really came from was too difficult. Perhaps she had given the child an old kiosk and invented a story. Perhaps. That afternoon, Caleb found himself outside the boarding house again. Lily sat on the porch with Jonah, proudly showing him Peppermint. Jonah turned the wooden horse over in his hands. This is fine work. Mr. Caleb made him. Jonah glanced across the street toward Caleb. Something unreadable passed over the doctor's face. Then Lily announced, I'm going to have cake next Thursday. Jonah smiled. I haven't forgotten. Caleb stopped. What's Thursday? Lily looked delighted that someone had asked. My birthday. How old? 6. Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. 6, next Thursday. He began counting without meaning to. Months. Seasons. The last cattle drive. The night he walked out of the Whitmore house. The morning Laura left town. The numbers came together too neatly. No. Jonah could still be her father. There were explanations. There had to be. But Caleb suddenly remembered Laura that night, saying, There's something else you need to know. And for the first time in 5 years, he wondered what he had refused to hear. He found Laura before sunset. She was alone behind the boarding house, taking dry sheets from the line when his footsteps made her turn. One look at his face, and her hands stopped. Caleb stood several feet away. He had rehearsed the question all the way there. Now his voice barely came out. Exactly how old is Lily? Laura. Laura's hands tightened around the sheet. Why? Caleb stepped closer. Answer me. Something in his voice made her look at him carefully. This was not the cold man who had spent weeks throwing Jonah's name between them like an accusation. There was fear in his eyes. Lily turns 6 next Thursday. Laura said. Caleb already knew that. Hearing it from her made the calculation impossible to escape. And when was she born? Laura's face changed. Now she understood. Caleb saw the exact moment it happened. His voice dropped. Whose daughter is she? For 5 years, Laura had imagined him asking that question. Sometimes she had imagined anger, sometimes regret. In her weakest moments, she had imagined joy. She had never imagined being this tired. You already decided that 5 years ago. I'm asking you now. And I answered you the first day you saw her. You said she was yours. She is. Laura. The way he said her name almost broke something she had spent years repairing. Caleb moved closer. Is Lily Miller's daughter? Laura looked at him for a long moment. Why does it matter now? His jaw tightened. Stop saying that. Why? You had no trouble answering before. That was before I knew her. The words escaped him before he could stop them. Laura went still. Caleb looked away. He could still feel Lily's arms around his neck after the runaway wagon. He could see her hiding half a biscuit for her mother, peppermint, sitting proudly in her hands. And suddenly, the possibility that she belonged to him was almost unbearable. Just tell me. Laura's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. 5 years ago, I asked you to listen. Caleb said nothing. You told me you'd heard enough. I was angry. And I was standing there, trying to tell you something that would change both our lives. His breath caught. Laura saw it. For 1 second. She could have ended 5 years of uncertainty with a single sentence, but the wound was still there. You don't get to demand the truth now, simply because you finally decided you were ready to hear it. She gathered the sheet and walked inside. Caleb did not follow. He stood beneath the clothesline long after the door closed, hearing the same words again. There's something else you need to know. He found Jonah at his clinic after dark. The doctor took one look at him and set down the medical ledger in his hands. You know, I know nothing. Then why are you here? Caleb closed the door. When you took Laura away 5 years ago, what was she to you? Jonah's expression hardened. A frightened woman trying to keep her father alive. Were you sleeping with her? Jonah stared at him. Then he laughed once, without humor. So that's what you believed. Answer me. No. The answer came immediately. Caleb felt something inside him begin to fall. Jonah continued. Laura never belonged to me. Not then. Not afterward. Caleb swallowed. Lily turns 6 next week. I know. She wears my mother's pendant. I know that too. Caleb's voice became almost unrecognizable. When you helped Laura leave, he could barely finish. Jonah did it for him. She was already pregnant. Silence filled the room. Caleb stared at him. For 5 years, he had imagined Laura leaving with another man. Now, every memory began rearranging itself. His hand tightened against the back of a chair. Pregnant with whose child? Jonah looked at him for a long moment. When he answered, there was no satisfaction in his voice, only sadness. Yours. Caleb left Jonah's clinic, carrying one word with him. Yours. He should have gone straight to Laura. Instead, he rode to the old Whitmore house. Thomas's papers were still stored beneath a loose floorboard, exactly where Jonah said Laura's father had hidden them before his death. Caleb found the original survey, names of the men who had ordered his family removed, and finally, a letter written in Thomas Whitmore's hand. Caleb read it once, then again. Thomas had confessed everything to Laura, only days before she left town. Days. Caleb sat on the dusty floor. He remembered asking, "How long?" Laura had hesitated, only for a moment, and Caleb had taken that moment and built 5 years of hatred upon it. Then another memory returned. "There's something else you need to know." He saw Laura standing before him again, pale, frightened, her hand moving toward her stomach. He had not noticed then. Now he could see nothing else. Enough. Caleb closed his eyes. She had been carrying his child, while he accused her of betraying him. She had been carrying his child, while he told her he never wanted to see her again. She had been carrying his child, and when someone fired through Thomas Whitmore's window, Laura had fled, frightened, pregnant, and believing the one man she should have been able to turn to wanted nothing more to do with her. The realization hurt worse than Jonah's answer. Caleb had spent 5 years believing Laura abandoned him, when, on the worst night of her life, he had abandoned her first. He found her behind the boarding house near sunset. "Why didn't you tell me?" Laura looked at him. "I tried. About Lily." "I know what you mean." His voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me? You said you didn't want another word from me." "Laura, you told me not to bring whatever life I chose back to your door." Caleb looked away. "So I gave you exactly what you asked for. 5 years without a word. I came back." Laura's expression changed. "When?" 2 days later. Silence. Laura looked down. "I waited for you that night." Caleb stopped breathing. "Before we left, I kept looking down the road. He had come back. She had waited. And 2 days had somehow become 5 years." Caleb looked at her worn dress, at hands roughened by work that once had been soft beneath his, and suddenly saw everything he had refused to imagine. "You did all this alone." "I had help when I needed it, Miller. Sometimes. Why didn't you let him do more?" Laura looked toward Lily, who sat on the steps playing with her wooden horse. "Because Rana wasn't her father." Caleb's throat tightened. "And I wasn't going to make one man spend his life paying for another man's choice." She did not accuse him. She did not need to. Caleb remembered the woman beneath the cottonwood, promising to keep his mother's pendant forever. He remembered how fiercely she had once loved him, and when she needed him most, he had made that love a punishment. "I thought you betrayed me." Laura's eyes finally filled. "And I spent 5 years knowing you believed I had." That broke him. Not anger, not Jonah, not even the years he had lost. Her. Laura had carried his child while carrying the shame of a betrayal she had never committed. And he had never been there to carry either burden with her. Then Caleb saw Lily. She was sitting on the steps, playing with the wooden horse he had carved. Her dress was mended at the elbow. He remembered her broken shoe, the biscuit she had hidden for Laura. The first question she had ever asked him. "May I eat what you didn't finish?" His chest tightened until breathing hurt. For nearly 6 years, his daughter had been growing up somewhere in the world, while he built fences, counted cattle, and taught himself to hate her mother. Then he remembered Lily sitting across from him. "If you had a little girl, would you leave her?" He had not known how to answer. Now he did. Caleb looked at Lily again. For weeks, he had seen Jonah Miller when he looked at her. Now he saw the stubborn little chin, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, his mother's turquoise resting against her chest. And suddenly, there was no other man between them. No Jonah. No 5 years. No lie left to hide behind. his daughter, his woman. Caleb did not go to Lily immediately. He stood beside Laura, watching their daughter play with the wooden horse, wanting to cross those few yards more than he had wanted anything in his life. But for once, he did not decide for someone else. Does she know anything about me? Only that her father wasn't with us. Caleb swallowed. Do I have the right to tell her? Laura looked at him, surprised by the question. You have the right to be her father, she said. But let her decide how quickly she wants to know you as one. Caleb nodded. Then he walked to Lily and crouched beside her. Remember when you asked if I had a little girl? Lily nodded. Turns out I do. Her eyes widened. Where is she? Caleb almost laughed, almost cried. Right here. Lily looked around, then slowly pointed at herself. Me, you. She studied his face with extraordinary seriousness. So you didn't know where I was? No. Did Mama hide me? Caleb looked toward Laura. 5 years ago he would have searched for someone else to blame. Not anymore. No. Your Mama tried to tell me. I didn't listen. Lily frowned. So Mama didn't know you were coming back. And you didn't know I was coming. Something like that. She thought about this. That's a lot of not knowing. Caleb's throat tightened. Yes, it is. Another long pause. Are you staying now? That question hurt more than all the others. If you'll let me. Lily looked down at Peppermint, then back at him. Can I call you Daddy? Caleb could not speak immediately. Finally he nodded. I'd like that very much. Lily threw her arms around his neck. This time Caleb held his daughter, knowing exactly who she was. And he did not let go first. But Laura did not come back to him that day. Caleb never asked her to. Over the following weeks, he learned how to be Lily's father. He taught her to sit a horse. Discovered she asked approximately 100 questions before breakfast. Bought her new shoes only after Laura agreed. And learned that Peppermint had to sleep beside her every night. He never used Lily as a reason to ask Laura for another chance. That mattered. One evening, Laura found him beneath the old cottonwood. The same tree, 5 years older. So were they. Lily says you promised her a pony. I said someday. She heard tomorrow. That sounds like your daughter. Laura raised an eyebrow. Our daughter, Caleb corrected. For a moment, they almost smiled. Then the silence between them changed. Being her father is your right. Laura said, being my husband isn't. I know. His answer came so easily that she stared at him. Caleb looked toward the creek. I spent 5 years deciding what your silence meant. I'm not going to decide what your heart means too. Laura's eyes filled. You weren't the only one who was wrong. He looked at her. You told me not to come back. And I let my pride turn those words into 5 years. Her voice trembled. Lily wasn't mine alone to keep from you. No, Caleb said softly. She wasn't. Laura lowered her eyes. We both lost those years. She did too. That was the truth neither could escape. Caleb stepped closer, but stopped before touching her. I don't know what happens from here. Once, Laura would have laughed at Caleb Redhawk, admitting he did not know something. Now it nearly broke her heart. But this time, he said, I'd rather ask than decide. He looked into the eyes he had tried and failed to forget. Is there still something here? Laura. She stared at him. 5 years of loneliness stood between them. 5 years of imagining him with Rebecca. 5 years of waking beside an empty space she had never allowed Jonah to fill. 5 years of telling herself hatred was easier than admitting she still loved the man who had broken her heart. There never stopped being something here. she whispered. That was the problem. Caleb's control broke. He reached for her. Laura met him halfway. Their kiss was nothing like the gentle kisses they had shared beneath that tree when they were young. There was too much inside it for gentleness. Laura caught the front of his shirt in both hands, and Caleb pulled her against him, as 5 years of anger, loneliness, and unbearable longing finally found somewhere to go. She kissed the man she had tried to hate. He kissed the woman he had never learned how to stop loving. For one breathless moment, neither was forgiving the past. They were simply grieving everything it had stolen. Caleb pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. I missed you. 4 words. Laura closed her eyes. That was what finally made her cry. I hated you for making me miss you. A broken laugh escaped him. I know. She kissed him again. This time it was slower. Not 5 years exploding. Something beginning again. Weeks later, the 3 of them sat at a table outside the same restaurant where Lily had first met Caleb. Caleb left half a biscuit on his plate. Lily noticed immediately. You're doing it again. Doing what? Not finishing. She took the biscuit, broke it in half, and handed one piece to Laura. Caleb held out his hand. What about me? Lily looked pointedly at his plate. You already had yours. Laura laughed. Caleb looked at her. For years he had remembered that sound better than he wanted to admit. Now, he did not have to remember it. Lily reached beneath the table and took his hand. Then she reached for Laura's. 5 years had taught Caleb and Laura how much silence could cost. So when their daughter joined their hands between hers, neither of them needed to say a word this time. Neither let go. The end. I have to admit, it was hard for me to say goodbye to Caleb, Laura, and little Lily after writing their story. Perhaps because, somewhere along the way, they stopped feeling like characters to me. Their pain felt real. Their 5 lost years felt real. And so did the love they tried so hard to bury, only to discover that some people simply cannot be replaced. If there is one thing I hope you carry from their story, it is this. Don't let pride speak when your heart still has something to say. Listen before you judge. Speak before silence becomes years. Because sometimes the person walking away is secretly hoping you will call them back. And sometimes the person who seems to have forgotten you has been missing you every single day. Caleb and Laura could never recover the 5 years they lost, but they could choose what to do with all the years still waiting for them. And maybe that is what love truly means. Not never hurting each other, not never making mistakes, but when the truth is finally known, having the courage to reach for each other again. Thank you for staying with Caleb, Laura, and Lily until the very end. I hope that long after this story is over, somewhere in your heart, you will still remember the little girl who unknowingly found her father by asking for half a biscuit he didn't finish. Until our next story, take care of the people you love. And if there are words in your heart that someone needs to hear, perhaps don't wait 5 years to say them.